Elara had spent her entire life in the Silverpine pack, tucked away in the corners where no one bothered to look. She was an Omega, the lowest rank a wolf could hold, and from the time she was small she had learned exactly what that meant. It meant waking before dawn to prepare food she would never be thanked for. It meant washing linens, sweeping floors, and stepping aside so that others could pass. It meant being invisible, spoken over, and pitied when she was noticed at all. Yet through all of it, Elara held on to one quiet hope. Like every wolf, she had been promised a mate, a person the moon itself would choose for her. On the night of her 21st year, that mate would finally be revealed. She told herself that when the day came, everything would change. Someone would look at her and see not an Omega, but simply Elara. The night of the ceremony arrived under a full silver moon. The whole pack gathered in the clearing at the heart of the forest, and for once, all eyes turned toward her. Elara stood in the center of the circle, her heart pounding so hard, she was certain everyone could hear it. She closed her eyes and waited for the bond to form, that invisible thread that would tie her to another soul. When it came, it was stronger than she had ever imagined. Warmth flooded through her chest, pulling her gaze upward until it landed on a tall figure standing at the edge of the clearing. A hush fell over the crowd. Whispers rose like a sudden wind. The man the bond had chosen was not a hunter, or a guard, or a farmer from her own pack. He was Kellen, the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf across all the surrounding territories, who had come to Silverpine only to visit its elders. For one shining moment, Elara felt her whole life shift. She was not invisible, she was chosen, and chosen by the greatest wolf of all. She let herself smile, and hope bloomed brighter than the moon above. But the moment shattered as quickly as it had come. Kellen's face, which had softened when their eyes met, hardened into something cold and unreadable. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Then, in a voice that carried across the silent clearing, he spoke the words no wolf ever wished to hear. I reject this bond. The world seemed to stop. Elara felt the warmth in her chest tear apart, replaced by a pain so sharp it stole her breath. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and then came the whispers, cruel and quick. Of course the Alpha King would reject her. She was only an Omega. What had she expected? Elara wanted to run, but her legs would not move. She could only stand there, trembling, as Kellen turned his back on her and strode away into the trees without a single glance behind him. The pack around her murmured and shook their heads, and not one person stepped forward to comfort her. She had never felt so alone in her life. What no one in that clearing understood, least of all Elara, was the storm raging behind Kellen's cold expression. The moment he had seen her, the bond had struck him just as fiercely, and every part of him had wanted to cross the clearing and take her hand. But Kellen carried burdens that no one else could see. For months, his enemies had been searching for a weakness, a way to strike at the Alpha King. They had made it known that anyone he loved would become a target. If he claimed Elara openly, he would be painting a mark upon her back. So he made the hardest choice of his life. He rejected her in front of everyone, loudly and publicly, so that no enemy would ever suspect she mattered to him. He walked into the trees with his heart breaking, telling himself it was the only way to keep her safe. He did not know that his cruelty would drive her away entirely. For 3 days, Elara moved through the pack like a ghost. The pity in everyone's eyes was worse than the whispers. She could not eat. She could not sleep. Every corner of Silverpine reminded her of the humiliation she had suffered, and she realized, slowly and painfully, that she could not stay. There was nothing left for her here. There never really had been. On the 4th morning, before the sun rose, Elara packed a single bag with a change of clothes, a little food, and the small handful of coins she had saved over the years. She left no note, for no one would miss her. She slipped out of the sleeping camp and walked north into the wild, toward the distant mountains where no pack held territory. She did not look back. The journey was long and hard. She walked for many days, sleeping under trees and drinking from cold streams. But strangely, with each step away from Silverpine, she felt a little lighter. No one was watching her now. No one was judging her. For the first time in her life, she belonged only to herself. At last, she reached a small village, nestled high in the mountains, a peaceful place of stone cottages and winding paths. The people there were not wolves but ordinary folk, and they did not know or care about ranks or bonds. When Elara asked for work, an elderly woman named Mira, who ran the village apothecary, took one look at her tired face and offered her a place to stay. And so Elara began a new life. She learned to grind herbs and mix remedies, to soothe fevers and heal wounds. She discovered that she had a gift for it, a steady hand and a caring heart. The villagers came to trust her, then to like her, then to love her. Children waved to her in the streets. Neighbors brought her bread and thanked her by name. Slowly, the Omega, who had been taught she was worth nothing, began to understand that she was worth a great deal. She grew stronger too, in body and in spirit. She hiked the mountain trails to gather rare plants. She stood up for herself when travelers tried to cheat her. She laughed more easily and cried less often. The girl who had fled Silverpine in shame was becoming a woman who knew her own value. What Elara never suspected, through all those long months, was that she was not as alone as she believed. Kellen had followed her. On the night she left Silverpine, he had returned in secret to check on her, only to find her gone. Panic had seized him. He had tracked her scent northward, keeping always to the shadows, always far enough behind that she would never sense him. When she settled in the mountain village, he settled too, in a hidden camp in the high forest above, close enough to watch over her, far enough to keep her safe. He became her silent guardian. When rogue wolves wandered too near the village passes, hungry and dangerous, Kellen drove them away before they ever caught her scent. When a harsh winter thinned Elara's earnings and she went to sleep hungry, a small pouch of coins would appear on her windowsill by morning, left by no one she could see. When sickness swept through a nearby town and threatened to spread, it was quietly stopped at the mountain's edge, though Elara never learned how. Night after night, Kellen sat alone beneath the stars and fought the pull of the bond that his rejection had never truly broken. It still lived inside him, faint but unbroken. A thread stretched thin across the distance between them. He watched her laugh with the villagers and ached to be part of that laughter. He watched her heal the sick and felt pride swell in his chest. He watched her grow happy without him and told himself that her happiness was enough, even if he could never share it. But peace, he knew, could not last forever. Far away, his enemies had not forgotten him. And in time, through spies and rumors, they began to hear whispers of a strange guardian in the northern mountains, a powerful wolf protecting a single village. It did not take them long to guess the truth. If the Alpha King was guarding something so carefully, then that something must be precious to him. They came for Elara. It happened on an ordinary evening, as the sun dipped low behind the peaks. Elara was closing up the apothecary when she noticed the village had gone too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. A cold feeling crept up her spine, an instinct she had not felt in a long time. She stepped outside and saw them, a group of strangers standing at the edge of the square, their eyes hard and their intentions clear. She knew at once they were wolves, and she knew they had not come in peace. "You are the Omega," one of them said, his voice low and mocking. "The one the Alpha King threw away, or so he wanted everyone to believe. Come with us quietly, and this village need not suffer." Elara's heart raced, but she did not run. She stood tall in front of the cottage where Mira slept, and the streets where the children played. She had fled once in her life, and she had promised herself she would never flee in fear again. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The Alpha King rejected me. I am nothing to him." The stranger laughed. "Then why has he spent all these months watching over you?" Before Elara could make sense of those words, a shadow moved at the top of the square. The strangers turned, and their laughter died in their throats. Standing there, tall and terrible in the fading light, was Kellen. Elara's breath caught. She had not seen his face since the night he broke her heart, and yet here he was, real and close, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she could not name. Kellen placed himself between Elara and the strangers, and though there were many of them, and only one of him, not one of them dared to take a step forward. His presence alone filled the square with a power that made the very air feel heavy. He did not need to raise his voice. "Leave," he said, and there was such quiet force in that single word that the strangers hesitated. "Leave now, and never return to these mountains. You came here believing she was a weakness you could use against me. You were wrong. She is not my weakness. She is the reason I will never stop fighting." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the strangers, one by one, backed away, melting into the darkness from which they had come. They knew, as everyone knew, that the Alpha King's word was final. By the time the moon rose fully, they were gone, and the village was safe once more. But Elara was not calm. As the danger faded, all the confusion and hurt of the past months rose up inside her at once. She turned to face Kellan, and her eyes were bright with anger and unshed tears. "You followed me," she said, her voice shaking. "All this time, the coins on my windowsill, the wolves that never reached the village, that was you. You have been here, watching me, and you never once let me know. I had to keep you safe," Kellan said quietly. "The rejection was never real, Elara. My enemies threatened everyone I cared about. If I had claimed you that night, they would have hunted you, so I pushed you away in front of everyone, to protect you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done." Elara let out a broken laugh. "To protect me, you humiliated me in front of the entire pack. You let me believe I was worthless. You let me run away thinking no one in the world would ever want me. And then, instead of telling me the truth, you hid in the shadows and decided for me what I could and could not know." She shook her head. "You did not protect me, Kellan. You controlled me. You treated me like something fragile to be guarded, not a person who deserved the truth." Her words struck him harder than any blow. For all his strength, Kellan had no defense against them, because he knew they were true. He had spent so long believing that keeping her safe was the same as loving her, that he had never stopped to ask what she needed. And what she had needed, all along, was honesty and respect. "You are right," he said at last, and the great Alpha King bowed his head before the Omega he had once rejected. "I was so afraid of losing you that I never gave you the chance to choose for yourself. I am sorry, Elara, truly." The anger in Elara's chest did not vanish all at once, but as she looked at him, at the sorrow written plainly on his face, something in her began to soften. She saw now that his cruelty had never been cruelty at all, only fear wearing a cruel mask, and she saw, too, how much she had grown. She was no longer the frightened girl who would have forgiven anything just to be wanted. She knew her own worth now, and she would accept nothing less than to be treated as an equal. "If we are to have anything," she said slowly, "it will be on my terms. I am not the Omega you rejected. I built a life of my own out here. I healed the sick and earned the love of a whole village with my own 2 hands. I will not be hidden, and I will not be decided for. If you want me, you will want the woman I have become, standing beside you, not behind you." Kellan looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he smiled. "There is no other way I would want you," he said. "I fell for your kindness, but it is your strength that humbles me now. Come back with me, Elara, not as an Omega and not as a hidden secret, but as my equal. Together we could change everything. No wolf would ever again be told they are worthless because of the rank they were born into." Elara thought of the pack that had scorned her, of all the small and overlooked wolves who had been taught, as she once was, to believe they were nothing. She thought of how much good she could do with the strength she had found, and slowly she reached out and took his hand. The bond, faint for so long, flared bright and whole between them, warmer and truer than it had been on that first night. But this time it was not the moon that bound them, it was choice, freely made, between 2 equals who had each learned what it meant to be truly seen. In the days that followed, Kellan gave up the old council traditions that had forced his cruel choice, and he faced down the last of his enemies, not by hiding those he loved, but by standing openly beside the woman who made him stronger. Together they returned to the territories, and together they changed them. The pack that had once dismissed Elara as merely an Omega learned to look again, and this time they saw a queen. And in every corner where a small, overlooked wolf had once been taught to feel invisible, there now grew a new and unshakable truth. No one, ever again, would be counted as nothing.